My name is Emily, and I moved to Manhattan a few months ago, excited about my fresh start. I found a small but cozy apartment in an old building on the east side. It wasn't glamorous, but it was my first real place, and I loved it. I settled in, enjoyed the bustling city, and quickly fell into a routine. Then there was Mark, my neighbor across the hall. At first, he seemed nice, if not a bit too friendly. He introduced himself the day I moved in. A middle-aged man with thinning hair and a wide smile. He always greeted me when I left in the mornings, like he knew exactly when I'd be stepping out. Morning, Emily. Going to work. His smile seemed harmless, so I didn't think much of it. Everyone has a routine, right? But after a few weeks, I noticed Mark knew a little too much about my day-to-day life. Once, I came home with a bag of groceries, and he commented on my choice of organic vegetables, though I hadn't shown them to anyone. He chuckled and said he just guessed, but it made me uneasy. How could he know? I brushed it off, told myself I was being paranoid. But then things got weirder. One evening, I came home late after a night out with friends. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced at Mark's door. Through a thin crack, I saw his eye watching me, barely visible in the dim hallway light. My hand shook, but I quickly turned my key, rushed into my apartment, and locked the door. I felt his eyes linger on my door for a while before his shadow finally disappeared back into his apartment. The next day, I confronted him in the hallway, asking if he'd been watching me last night. He laughed it off, saying he thought he heard something and was just checking. He invited me in for coffee, which I declined, saying I was busy. But that's when I noticed something strange. His window faced directly into mine, just at an angle where he could see into my living room. A few days later, I was sitting on my couch when I noticed something glinting in his window. It looked like a phone. Was he recording me? I froze, my heart pounding. I shut my curtains and tried to brush it off. But the next day, I went to the police. They visited his apartment, searched it thoroughly, but found nothing. I felt trapped, knowing he was still watching me, but with no proof, I couldn't do anything. Weeks passed, and things started disappearing from my apartment. Small items at first, a hairbrush, a pen, a book. I started to doubt myself, but then, one day, I noticed my favorite mug was missing. I hadn't taken it out of my apartment. That night, I sat up late, listening, and I heard the faint creak of floorboards in the hallway outside my door. My heart pounded. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. There he was, standing in front of my door, holding my mug, his eyes on my peephole as if he knew I was watching him. I stumbled back, my hand shaking, and called the police again. They found nothing. No sign he'd been in my apartment, no stolen items in his. I knew he was getting away with it, but I couldn't prove anything. I moved out a week later, unable to sleep another night with him watching me, knowing he was out there with my things, knowing he would do it all again to someone else. My name is Rachel, and this happened in New York City just last fall. I still can't shake the memory. I work late shifts at a restaurant, and one night, I was exhausted, eager to get home to my apartment in Queens. The subway station was closed for maintenance, so I decided to hail a cab. It was nearly 1:00 a.m., and the streets were quieter than usual. A cab pulled up, and I hopped in, giving the driver my address. He didn't say a word, just nodded and started driving. I tried to settle in, but something felt off. He wasn't like the usual chatty drivers. He kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror every few seconds. I told myself I was just paranoid. It had been a long day after all. As we drove, I noticed he wasn't taking the usual route. We were supposed to head down Broadway and cross the bridge to Queens, but he turned onto a narrow, empty street I didn't recognize. I leaned forward, trying to stay calm, and politely reminded him of my address. He just nodded, barely looking at me, and muttered, "Shortcut." The shortcut turned into several winding, deserted streets. I couldn't see another car or even a streetlight in sight. My stomach twisted, and I started to get really nervous. I forced a laugh, trying to break the tension. "Hey, I think we're a bit off course. Could you just drop me off here? I can walk the rest." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached over and casually hit the lock button on the doors. My heart pounded. Every nerve in my body screamed that something was terribly wrong. I pulled out my phone and pretended to make a call. I spoke loudly, as if talking to someone, and said, "Yeah, I'm almost home." The cab just turned onto Oakwood Avenue. I was making up the street name, praying it sounded real. "Can you meet me out front?" "Yeah, I'll be there in a minute." The driver's eyes flicked up to the mirror again, and for a second, I thought I saw a hint of anger. But then, suddenly, he pulled over to the side of the road and unlocked the doors. "Here," he said in a gruff voice, as if he'd done me a favor. I scrambled out, clutching my bag, and he sped off before I could get a clear look at his license plate. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by old warehouses. I had to walk a few blocks before I could find another cab. When I got home, I felt shaken but relieved it was over. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't even sure what had happened. A week later, I was at work, about to start my shift. As I glanced out the restaurant's front window, my heart stopped. Parked across the street was the same cab, the driver staring directly at me. He didn't move, didn't wave, just watched me with that same cold expression. The police couldn't trace the license plate. No one knew who he was. And every night for weeks after that, I'd look over my shoulder, wondering if he found me again. My name is Danny, and I work the night shift at a small supermarket in Lakewood. Not the most exciting job, but it's quiet, and I like that. I'm usually the only one at the checkout past 10 p.m., so I get to know the regulars well. One of them is a woman named Sarah. At least that's what it says on her loyalty card. She's a few years older than me, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair she always ties back. Sarah comes in several times a week, usually buying just one or two things: a pack of gum, a bottle of water, or a loaf of bread. We'd exchange small talk whenever she came to my register, but I always sensed something strange. She was distracted, like her mind was miles away. Her eyes kept shifting to the aisles or even the doors. One Tuesday night, I noticed her coming in, but she looked more tense than usual. As she wandered through the aisles, I saw a man lurking near the back of the store. He was middle-aged, wearing a black hoodie, and seemed like he didn't belong. He'd disappear whenever anyone walked past, but he'd reappear if Sarah was alone. He wasn't shopping. He was just there, watching. My skin crawled. I thought about telling my manager, Greg, who was in the back room, but I wasn't sure what to say. When Sarah came to my register, I tried to act normal, but I asked, "Is everything okay?" She gave me this forced smile. "Oh yeah, just tired, I guess." That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I told Greg, who just shrugged and said, "You're overthinking it, Danny. Probably just a coincidence." The next night, Sarah didn't come in. I brushed it off, but when she didn't show the night after, my stomach started twisting. Then on Friday, she was back. But this time, she looked awful. Her cheek was bruised, and she kept her head down, not making eye contact with anyone. I almost didn't recognize her. She came to my register with just a can of soup. As I scanned it, she leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Danny, he's been following me," she said, her voice shaky. "This is my last visit. I can't keep coming here." A chill went down my spine. I wanted to ask more, to help her somehow, but before I could say anything, she was gone. She moved fast, disappearing into the night. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I thought about reporting it, but what could I say? I didn't even know if she was in real danger. A week later, Greg showed me a news article. A woman named Sarah had gone missing, last seen leaving our store. They found her car abandoned near the highway, but no trace of her. Every night, I wonder if I could have done something more, if I had listened better. Now, every time a new customer walks in, I catch myself glancing over my shoulder, wondering who might be watching.